The rain hammered against the newsroom windows that October night in 2024. Michael Harrison, 53 years old, sat alone, surrounded by yellowing papers and the ghosts of stories that never made it to print. His editor had given him one last chance. Find a story worth telling or clear out his desk by morning. 20 years of journalism, a Pulitzer gathering dust, a bitter divorce, a daughter who hadn't returned his calls in 3 years. His hands trembled, not from the vodka he'd given up 6 months ago, but from knowing this was his final shot at redemption. That's when he found her. Sarah Chen's face stared up from a water-stained missing persons report dated March 15, 2014. Even through the degraded photocopy, her eyes held something that made Michael's breath catch. Not fear, but fierce determination, as if she knew her story would matter someday. The case file was pathetically thin. Probable runaway. History of depression. Single mother. Financial difficulties. The investigation lasted exactly 3 weeks before being shelved with thousands of other forgotten souls. Sarah had been 28, worked double shifts at a textile factory in Millbridge's industrial district, raising her daughter Lily alone after emigrating from China 6 years earlier. She vanished on a Tuesday morning after dropping Lily at school. Her usual routine, her usual smile according to witnesses. Her car was found by the river 2 days later, purse inside, no signs of struggle. The police concluded she'd walked away from her life. Case closed. Another immigrant who couldn't handle the American dream. But there was a handwritten note, paper clipped to the back, almost hidden. The ink faded, but the urgency still bleeding through the words. She would never leave Lily. Never. You don't understand the kind of mother she was. Please believe me. Someone needs to believe me. Signed by Grace Patterson, Sarah's neighbor, dated 1 month after the disappearance. Michael looked at his own reflection in the dark window. His hands shook less from excitement now than from the familiar ache of regret. This wasn't just another story. Somewhere deep in his gut, below the coffee acid and the weight of his failures, he knew this was different. This was personal. He picked up his phone and dialed information. Grace Patterson, Millbridge area. The operator found 3 matches. On the second try, an elderly voice answered, cautious and tired. "Mrs. Patterson, my name is Michael Harrison. I'm a reporter with the Tribune. I want to talk about Sarah Chen." The silence stretched so long, he thought she'd hung up. He could hear her breathing, could almost feel her weighing whether to trust another stranger with her truth. Then, barely a whisper that carried 10 years of waiting. "You're 10 years too late, Mr. Harrison. 10 years of Lily growing up without her mother. 10 years of everyone forgetting Sarah existed." "Maybe," Michael said, surprising himself with his honesty. "But I'm here now, and I want to know the truth." Grace Patterson's sigh carried the weight of a decade. Sarah used to say that truth is like water. It always finds its way through the cracks, no matter how long it takes. "Come tomorrow, 47 Elm Street. Bring a recorder. I want every word documented this time. And Mr. Harrison, don't come if you're just going to write another story about a runaway immigrant. Sarah deserves better than that." Michael held the phone long after she hung up, Sarah's eyes still staring at him from the photograph. In them, he saw his own daughter's eyes the last time he'd disappointed her, the last time he'd chosen a story over showing up. Tomorrow, he would drive to Millbridge. Tomorrow, he would begin a journey that would consume 10 years of his life. Tomorrow, he would start learning that some stories don't just want to be told. They demand to be lived. The rain continued its assault on the windows as Michael carefully placed Sarah's file in his bag. He turned off the newsroom lights, knowing somehow that he would never sit at this desk again. Not because he would fail, but because this story would change him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Sarah Chen had been missing for 10 years. But sitting in that dark newsroom, Michael Harrison realized he'd been missing for much longer. Maybe, just maybe, finding her would help him find himself. Grace Patterson's house stood like a guardian on Elm Street. Paint peeling but dignified, garden wild but somehow purposeful. Michael parked his battered Honda and sat for a moment, watching an elderly woman in the window arrange photographs on a mantel. She moved with the careful precision of someone preserving evidence. The door opened before he could knock. Grace Patterson was 73, silver hair pulled back, eyes that had seen too much but refused to look away. She studied him like she was reading his soul's resume, finding it barely adequate. "You look like a man who's lost something," she said, not unkindly. "That's good. Sarah needs someone who understands loss." She led him to a living room that was part shrine, part evidence locker. The walls were covered with photographs of Sarah and Lily, newspaper clippings, printed emails, a timeline mapped out in red string like something from a detective's fever dream. In the center, a photo of Sarah holding baby Lily, both laughing at something beyond the camera's view, frozen in a moment of perfect joy. "Sarah moved in next door in 2008, Grace began, settling into an armchair that had molded to her shape over years. Fresh from Guangzhou, spoke little English, but her smile needed no translation. Her husband had died in China, some kind of industrial accident. She came here with nothing but Lily and a determination that could move mountains. She worked at the Millbridge textile factory, the night shift first, then doubles when she could get them. Every penny went to Lily's education. She'd come home exhausted, hands raw from the chemicals. But she'd still help Lily with homework, still make elaborate paper dragons for her school projects. She was learning English from library books and teaching Lily Mandarin from memory. She wanted Lily to have both worlds, you understand, to be proud of where she came from while reaching for where she was going. Grace stood, moved to the window that faced what used to be Sarah's house. New people live there now. They painted over the height marks Sarah had drawn on the kitchen doorframe, tracking Lily's growth. They pulled up her vegetable garden. But I remember everything. "Tell me about the weeks before she disappeared," Michael said softly. Grace's face darkened like a storm rolling in. That's when everything changed. Sarah had always been careful, watchful, the way women who've known danger are. But 3 weeks before she vanished, she became someone else, jumped at shadows, started walking Lily to school instead of letting her take the bus. She asked me to keep a spare key, made me promise that if anything happened, I would make sure Lily was safe. Did she say what she was afraid of? Grace turned from the window, and Michael saw tears she'd probably held back for years. She said there was someone from her past, someone who had found her. She wouldn't give me details, said the less I knew, the safer I'd be. But I saw a car, a black sedan with tinted windows, parked outside her house several times that last week. When I mentioned it to the police, they said I was a confused old woman, said I was making things up to make Sarah's abandonment seem like something else. Michael felt the familiar tingle of a story taking shape, but this was different. This wasn't about headlines or redemption anymore. This was about a woman who had been erased from the official record, whose fear had been dismissed, whose love for her daughter had been questioned. "Where's Lily now?" he asked. Grace smiled for the first time, proud and sad simultaneously. "She's at the State University, pre-med, full scholarship. She lives with me during breaks, has since Sarah disappeared. The state wanted to put her in foster care, but I fought them. Sarah had made me her emergency contact at school, and I had enough saved to prove I could support her. Lily is brilliant, Mr. Harrison. Brilliant and broken and brave, just like her mother. She still believes Sarah is alive somewhere, unable to come home. She's never stopped believing." Lily Chen entered Grace's living room, carrying herself like someone who had learned too young that the world was a dangerous place. 20 years old now, she had her mother's delicate features, but her eyes held a steel that Sarah's photographs only hinted at. She sat across from Michael, back straight, hands folded, a young woman who had practiced composure until it became armor. "Mr. Harrison, Grace tells me you're different from the others, that you actually want to find my mother, not just write about her. The others, they came with their minds made up. Another immigrant tragedy. Another woman who couldn't handle the pressure. They never asked the right questions." "What are the right questions?" Michael asked, genuinely curious. Lily's composure cracked slightly, revealing the 10-year-old girl still living inside her. Why did my mother teach me to hide? Why did she make me memorize escape routes from our house? Why did she cry in her sleep, calling out names I didn't recognize? Everyone wants to talk about the day she disappeared. No one asks about the years before, about what she was running from when she came to America. Michael leaned forward. What was she running from? Lily reached into her bag and pulled out a worn notebook, its pages yellowed and covered in Chinese characters, mixed with English words. My mother kept journals. She wrote in code, mixing Mandarin, Cantonese, and English. It took me 3 years to decode them all. She was documenting something, Mr. Harrison, something that started in Guangzhou and followed her here. She opened the notebook, her finger tracing words that meant nothing to Michael, but everything to her. My mother witnessed something in China, an industrial accident at a chemical plant that killed 17 workers, including my father. But it wasn't an accident. She had proof that safety regulations were ignored, that officials were bribed. She tried to report it, but they threatened her, said they would take me away, put me in an orphanage. So she ran, used every penny from my father's life insurance to get us to America. But someone found her here, Michael said, pieces clicking together. Lily nodded. 3 weeks before she disappeared, she received a photograph under our door. It was me taken at school with a message in Mandarin. Stop talking or the child pays. But here's what the police never understood. My mother wasn't talking to anyone about China. She had buried that life, which means someone thought she was about to talk. Someone was scared of what she knew. Michael felt the story shifting, deepening. This wasn't just about a missing mother anymore. This was about international cover-ups, about the long reach of corruption, about a woman who carried dangerous knowledge like a bomb in her chest. Lily, do you know who took that photograph? Lily stood, walked to the window just as Grace had done. For 10 years, I've been looking for that answer. I've learned Mandarin perfectly, traced every connection my mother had in China, followed paper trails through immigration records. And 6 months ago, I found something. A man named Chen, no relation despite the name, entered the United States 2 weeks before my mother disappeared. He left the country the day after she vanished. He was listed as a business consultant, but I tracked his real employment. He worked for the same company that owned the chemical plant where my father died. The room felt smaller suddenly, charged with the electricity of revelation. This was the kind of story that destroyed people, that reached across oceans and years to silence truth. Have you gone to the police with this? Lily laughed, bitter and knowing. I tried. They said I was creating conspiracy theories out of grief, that I was a young woman unable to accept that her mother abandoned her. Detective Morrison actually suggested I seek therapy instead of playing detective, but I know my mother, Mr. Harrison. She would never leave me unless she had no choice. Either she's dead, or she's being held somewhere, or she's hiding to protect me. Those are the only possibilities I can live with. The Millbridge textile factory squatted on the edge of town like a guilty secret, its brick walls stained with decades of industrial sweat. Michael stood at the gates at 5 in the morning, watching the night shift stumble out and the day shift shuffle in, ghosts passing each other in the grey dawn. These were Sarah's people, immigrants and locals bound together by necessity and minimum wage. An older Vietnamese woman noticed him, recognized the reporter's hunger in his eyes. "You're asking about Sarah," she said. It wasn't a question. Word traveled fast in the ecosystem of the forgotten. You knew her. The woman who introduced herself as Mai looked around nervously. "Not here. The cafe on 3rd Street, 1 hour. Bring cash." Not for me, but for Tom. He saw things that made him quit 2 days after Sarah disappeared. He drinks now to forget, but money helps him remember. The cafe was a grease-stained relic where coffee cost $1 and questions cost nothing but courage. Mai arrived with a man whose hands shook with more than age. Tom had been a floor supervisor, one of the few Americans in management who actually cared about the workers. Sarah was different, Tom began, wrapping his fingers around a coffee mug like it was a lifeline. She worked harder than anyone, never complained, but she watched everything. She had a mind like a computer, memorizing patterns, noting who talked to who, which shipments came when. I thought she was just conscientious, but the week before she disappeared, she came to me terrified. He pulled out a flask, poured something into his coffee that made Mai frown. She said she'd seen someone from her past, a man who shouldn't be in America, shouldn't know where she was. She begged me to change her shifts, to let her work different hours. I tried, but management refused, said she was being dramatic. The next day, there was an accident in her section, a chemical spill that could have killed her if she hadn't jumped back at exactly the right moment, almost like she was expecting it. Michael's recorder captured every word, but his mind was racing ahead. Was someone trying to kill her at work? Tom laughed bitterly. Kill her? No. Scare her. Make her run. See, Sarah had been documenting safety violations at our factory for months. She never said why, but I think she recognized the same patterns from China. The same corners being cut, the same chemicals being mishandled. She was building a case, though God knows who she planned to give it to. Mai leaned forward, voice dropping. There's more. After Sarah disappeared, men came to the factory, not police. They had badges, but wrong kind, you understand? They took boxes from the office, employee files. They interviewed all the Chinese workers separately. Asked about Sarah, but also about what we might have seen, what she might have told us. They made it clear that talking about Sarah would affect our immigration status. Tom's hands steadied as he found his purpose in the telling. I quit because they offered me money. $10,000 to forget Sarah Chen ever worked there, to lose any records I might have kept. They knew I was behind on my mortgage, knew my wife was sick. They knew everything. I took the money, God help me, I took it, but I kept this. He pulled out a thumb drive, small and black and heavy with possibility. Sarah gave this to me the day before she disappeared. Said if anything happened to her, to give it to someone who could use it. I was too scared before. But 10 years of drinking hasn't made me forget her face when she handed it to me. She knew she was going to disappear one way or another. Grace Patterson's basement had been transformed into a war room. Old computers not connected to any network. Printed documents covering every wall. And in the center, Lily Chen and Michael Harrison staring at the screen as Sarah's digital ghost spoke to them across a decade. The thumb drive contained everything. Photos of safety violations at both the Chinese plant and Millbridge factory, the same company behind both through a web of shell corporations. Financial records showing bribes, cover-ups, a pattern of dead workers treated as acceptable losses. But most damning was a video Sarah had recorded days before she vanished. In it, she sat in what looked like Lily's bedroom, speaking in careful English, choosing each word like it might be her last. My name is Chen Xiaoli, known here as Sarah Chen. I'm making this recording because I believe my life is in danger. I have evidence that the chemical company responsible for my husband's death in Guangzhou is operating in America under different names, repeating the same crimes. I have been contacted by a journalist in China who wants my testimony for an international investigation, but I have also been threatened. If something happens to me, please protect my daughter Lily. She is innocent. Everything I have done has been for her. Lily hadn't moved for the entire video, tears streaming silently down her face. Her mother's voice, which she'd been forgetting despite herself, now filled the room like a prayer. There's more, Michael said gently, clicking to another file. This is from the Millbridge Police Department's traffic cameras, obtained through a source I still have there. The grainy footage showed Sarah's car on the morning she disappeared, but she wasn't alone. A figure was visible in the passenger seat, head down, possibly unconscious or restrained. The car that followed was the black sedan witnesses had described. She didn't run, Lily whispered. Someone took her. Michael pulled up immigration records he'd obtained through less than legal means. Chen Wei, the man you identified, left the country on a private jet owned by a company that doesn't officially exist. The flight plan said Mexico, but the plane's transponder was turned off over international waters. Sarah could have been on that plane. Grace gripped Lily's hand. Are you saying Sarah might still be alive? Michael chose his words carefully. I'm saying she didn't commit suicide, and she didn't abandon Lily. She was taken, either to be silenced permanently or to be held as leverage. The Chinese journalist she mentioned in the video died in a car accident 2 weeks after Sarah disappeared. 3 other witnesses to the Guangzhou incident have also died or vanished over the past decade. Sarah is the only one unaccounted for. Lily stood, pacing, her brilliant mind processing possibilities. If she's alive, she's been held for 10 years. Why keep her alive that long? Why not just kill her? Because killing her would have created an investigation, Michael reasoned. But a missing immigrant woman who supposedly abandoned her child, that's barely a statistic. And as long as she's missing rather than dead, she's also a threat they can control. If other witnesses think she might be alive somewhere, suffering because she talked, it keeps them silent. The room fell quiet as they absorbed the implications. Then Lily spoke with a determination that would have made her mother proud. We need to make noise. So much noise that keeping her becomes more dangerous than releasing her. We need the story to go viral, to reach Chinese social media, to make it impossible for them to hide anymore. The story broke on a Tuesday, exactly 10 years and 7 months after Sarah Chen disappeared. Michael's article in the Tribune ran simultaneously with translations in Mandarin appearing on Chinese social media, spreading like wildfire before censors could stop it. Within 6 hours, Sarah Chen was trending globally. Within 12 hours, her face was on every major news network. The title was simple but powerful: The Mother Who Knew Too Much. Sarah Chen's 10-year silence, but it was Lily who became the story's heart. She gave one interview, standing at the gates of the Millbridge factory, wearing her mother's jade pendant, speaking in perfect English and Mandarin. She didn't cry, she didn't plead. She simply stated facts with the precision of the doctor she was training to become. My mother is not missing. She was taken. She is being held against her will because she possessed evidence of crimes that span continents. Every day she is gone is a day of injustice, not just for our family, but for the 17 workers who died in Guangzhou, for the workers poisoned in Millbridge, for every immigrant woman whose disappearance is dismissed as unimportant. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Protests erupted at Chinese consulates. The Millbridge factory was surrounded by reporters. The FBI opened an investigation. The Chinese government issued denials that only fueled more speculation. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A woman in Toronto called the Tribune, voice trembling. She said she was a nurse at a private facility that treated patients who didn't officially exist. She'd seen the news about Sarah Chen. One of her patients, a woman who'd been there for 8 years, had reacted to the television report in a way that made her suspicious. Michael and Lily flew to Toronto immediately, the lawyer meeting them there with a court order. The facility was pristine, hidden in plain sight as a rehabilitation center for wealthy addicts. The nurse led them down hallways that smelled of expensive disinfectant and despair. Room 47 was locked from the outside. Inside, a woman sat by the window, thin but straight-backed, hair gone grey, but eyes still fierce with the determination Michael had seen in that first photograph. She looked up as they entered, and her face crumbled and rebuilt itself in the space of a heartbeat. Lily. The word was barely a whisper, a prayer made sound. Mama. The reunion was not the Hollywood moment anyone might have expected. Sarah didn't run to her daughter. She couldn't, legs atrophied from years of limited movement. Lily didn't cry out dramatically. Instead, she walked slowly to her mother, knelt beside her chair, and took her hands with the same careful precision she used in her pre-med labs. You grew up, Sarah said in Mandarin, then switched to English. You grew up beautiful and strong. I grew up angry, Lily replied, angry enough to find you. Sarah looked at Michael then, recognizing something in him. "You're the reporter, the broken one who needed a story to save him. How did you know?" Michael asked. Sarah smiled, and for the first time in 10 years, it reached her eyes, because only someone trying to save themselves would work this hard to save someone else. "Thank you for believing I mattered." The story that emerged over the following hours was one of corporate kidnapping, of a woman held in comfortable captivity, told daily that her daughter had been placed in foster care, shown fabricated reports of Lily struggling, threatened that any attempt to escape would result in Lily's deportation or worse. 6 months later, on a warm March morning, Sarah Chen walked into the Millbridge Community Center for the first time in 11 years. The room was packed with the families of the missing, the found, and those still searching. Michael sat in the back row, his daughter Emma beside him. She'd called after seeing the story, and they were slowly rebuilding what had been broken. Sarah stood at the podium, where Lily had kept vigil every Tuesday for a decade. She spoke in English, flavored with multiple accents, a voice that had traveled through hell and chosen to return with gifts instead of grievances. "My name is Sarah Chen. 11 years ago, I disappeared from this town. For 10 of those years, my daughter searched for me. She was helped by a neighbor who became her guardian, Grace Patterson. She was helped by a reporter who needed redemption, Michael Harrison. She was helped by factory workers who remembered kindness, by lawyers who believed in justice, by strangers who shared our story until it could no longer be ignored." She paused, looking at the wall of missing faces, each with its own candle, its own family holding on to hope. "I stand here not as a miracle, but as evidence that the disappeared can be found, that the silenced can speak, that love is stronger than fear. My story has opened investigations that have found 17 other people held like I was, 17 families reunited. But there are more, so many more." Lily joined her mother at the podium, now in her 2nd year of medical school, having added a law degree to her planned education. Together, they announced the Chen Foundation for the Disappeared, funded by the settlement from the companies responsible for Sarah's imprisonment. "We will search for the missing," Sarah continued. "We will amplify the voices of those who are ignored because they are poor or immigrant or simply inconvenient to remember. We will be the water that finds its way through every crack, wearing down the walls that separate families." Tom from the factory stood up, sober now for 3 months. "Sarah, I need to say something. I took money to forget you. I was a coward." Sarah's response carried no judgment, only understanding. "You were surviving, Tom. We all do what we must to survive. The question is what we do after survival, when we have the chance to truly live. You kept the evidence that helped find me. That was your courage, just delayed." As the meeting continued, Michael found himself standing with Grace Patterson by the window, watching Lily and Sarah work side by side, cataloging new cases, offering hope to families just beginning their searches. "She's different," Grace observed about Sarah. "Harder in some ways, softer in others. Trauma changes us," Michael replied. "But she didn't let it define her. Neither did Lily." Grace smiled. "Neither did you, Mr. Harrison. That broken reporter who showed up at my door 2 years ago wouldn't recognize the man standing here now." Michael thought about the Pulitzer that no longer mattered, the awards that had cost him his family, the stories he'd written that had changed nothing. Then he looked at Sarah and Lily Chen, at the families around them, at his own daughter Emma, learning from their example. "I spent 20 years writing stories," he said. "This is the first time I've been part of one that mattered." As the sun set over Millbridge, casting long shadows through the community center windows, Sarah Chen began to sing. It was a Chinese lullaby she'd hummed to Lily as a baby, one she'd hummed to herself through 11 years of captivity. One by one, others joined in, humming if they didn't know the words, creating a harmony born of shared loss and stubborn hope. Sarah Chen's story wasn't about the crime that silenced her or the system that failed her. It was about a love so fierce it survived 11 years of separation. It was about a daughter who refused to accept easy answers, a neighbor who became family, a broken reporter who found redemption in someone else's truth. It was about the power of remembering those the world wants to forget. The investigation would continue for years, arrests would be made, companies would fall, systems would be challenged. But that evening in Millbridge, in a community center that smelled of coffee and hope, Sarah Chen was simply a mother reunited with her daughter, surrounded by others who understood that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is refusing to disappear.